Sudan's transitional government signed a peace deal with rebel groups early October to end years of conflict in the country.
However, the deal did not involve some major rebel groups, and people affected by the civil war say they were not consulted and thus the agreement might not hold.
But we've not been properly consulted on the deal that's taking place or represented, and so we're concerned it may not hold.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya.
And I am Shilene Lima.
Welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today, which is focusing on a fragile peace agreement in Sudan that is now worsened by the country's move to normalize ties with the Israeli regime.
This week, we're also looking into quite positive news coming out of Africa. Yes, we are looking at how Africa's innovators have seen opportunities amid the COVID-19 pandemic and are now solving challenges it imposes, leading to hope rather than despair across the continent.
We also have our weekly collection of interesting news from across Africa.
Before the end of our show, we shall peruse our social media pages for your comments, so keep tweeting as you watch this program.
Sudan peace deal faces challenges. Sudan's transitional government signed a major peace deal with rebel groups early October that's designed to end years of conflict in the country. The agreement, signed in the South Sudan capital Juba, aims at putting an end to decades of civil war that led to hundreds of thousands of deaths and millions displaced.
Two major rebel groups, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement and Army North and the Sudan Liberation Movement and Army, are not part of the peace deal.
The Sudanese government spokesman acknowledged that major rebel groups boycotted the deal.
We're glad that we managed to achieve a milestone regarding achieving peace in Sudan. We know there are other factions that are yet to sign, and we hope there will be another round to negotiate with these groups.
People on the ground also say they were not consulted and they have expressed doubt if the deal will actually last.
We've been in these camps since 2004. We want the conflict to end so we can go back to our harvest and to our ancestral home. But we've not been properly consulted on the deal that's taking place or represented, and so we're concerned it may not hold.
Now, to discuss further the deal between the Sudanese government and some rebel groups in the country, we have contacted Joseph Ochieno, a writer and African affairs analyst. Thanks a lot, Mr. Ochieno, for your time. Now, the Sudan peace agreement was signed in Juba last October. However, major armed groups did not sign the deal. How will this impact on the implementation of this landmark deal?
The parties, particularly the dissenting parties, considering the history of the country and considering the history particularly of some of the areas that had been substantially marginalized over a long period of time, need not only to be taken seriously, but whatever happens, it would be in the best interest of both parties, and particularly the governing authorities, to make sure that they listen to the opposition, because it's not impossible in Sudan for this agreement to falter, should they not necessarily, should they not ensure that they brought together key players together. And key players, when they're armed, you know that in these days, you cannot really disregard any armed opposition, whatever their level of strength or influence in the country.
Thanks for that, Joseph Ochieno, African affairs analyst and writer.
Eastern Sudan has recently been rocked by protests, with demonstrators disrupting operations at Port Sudan, the country's largest sea gateway. The protesters were voicing their anger at a lopsided deal between the government and some rebel groups. The irate protesters called for the independence of Eastern Sudan, raising alarm in a country that witnessed the secession of South Sudan less than a decade ago. Why are people in Eastern Sudan objecting to the Juba agreement, and what are their demands?
There is a sense that the bigger guys, the stronger guys, the guys who are basically meeting around table, are people who are looking for pieces of pies for themselves and their interests rather than the Greater Sudan. So theirs is a legitimate concern, but one of the issues is a resolution of questions of land, which is still a big issue in the Sudan, but also on the other, a settlement of, if you like, transitional justice, considering what has happened since these guys came into power, and including particularly most of the sufferings that the people in that country and in that sub-region faced during the al-Bashir regime. And so, very, very legitimate. Like I said before, they need to be taken seriously. They need to be brought on board. It's a good step ahead, but they need to be considered, and their grievances need to be brought forward. And if I were amongst the parties, I would do my level best to make sure that they are not left behind.
Sudanese security forces regularly clash with demonstrators protesting against the dire state of the economy and poor living conditions.
The Sudanese people are also protesting the recent move by the transitional government to normalize ties with the Israeli regime.
Many Sudanese can't afford basic commodities anymore, and people stand in long queues for fuel and bread. A frustrated Sudanese citizen explains here what he goes through.
Sometimes I wait in the queue for half an hour and sometimes 45 minutes. And in the end, they either say the electricity is out, or there is no bread or no more flour to make bread. This is very difficult.
Sudan is also facing protests due to high prices of bread and increased fuel prices. Mr. Ochieno, do these protests present a major threat to the transitional authority in the country?
Well, they do, because the transitional authorities themselves have managed to exploit the protests that led to the overthrow of al-Bashir. And many of these protests were linked, economically linked, obviously politically driven, but mainly around injustices, around how the security services were behaving, high prices of bread, and economic hardships. So it's important that these protests are actually taken seriously. Sudan actually, amongst many African countries, is one of those that can actually not only prove organized protests, but very deeply and well-driven, intellectually organized and well-articulated protests and organizations. Sudan amongst very few African countries that are able to prove that. So they know it.
While the transitional authority in Sudan came to power after a popular revolution that toppled the regime of Omar al-Bashir last year, many Sudanese say their revolution was hijacked by the military. Sudanese people feel the military-led transitional authority is now serving a foreign agenda while ignoring the main objectives of the revolution that ousted al-Bashir.
أولاً الخروج اليوم من أجل استكمال مهام الثورة، الخروج اليوم من أجل إتمام عملية السلام والاهتمام بمعاش الناس ومحاسبة القتلة والمجرمين من بقايا النظام البائد الذين ما زالوا بالكوبر من دون أن يتم تقديمهم لأي محاكمات.
Now, Mr. Ochieno, some protesters in Sudan have complained of foreign interference in the country. What is the extent of foreign interference in Sudan's internal affairs?
Sudan, like most of her neighbors in this region, and indeed most of Africa, except possibly bits of Southern Africa and these days bits of the extreme West, have been and continue to be, unfortunately, colonies of major external interests, including, of course, the traditional West Americas of this world, Russia, and indeed, as I said, even Israel. And Israel, all this is because of the geopolitics and the resources of the region, whether it is about mineral resources in Congo or its strategic location for Sudan, about its oil and life in Somalia, or perhaps the question about the River Nile and Egypt, and whether or not Egypt is comfortable, and if Egypt is uncomfortable, whether or not Israel is happy.
Well, it appears that Sudan is headed for turbulent times ahead after main rebel groups refuse to sign the Juba peace deal.
Things have been made worse by the country's shameful move to normalize ties with the Israeli regime. And now in this segment of our program, we are going to present you with interesting news and events from across Africa. Over to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Henia. And thank you all for staying with us. Now on to some news. Aquarec, a Kenyan startup, is using an IoT application for fish farming. The app involves using a water sensor that measures temperature, pH, and oxygen levels, which then alerts farmers at least 3 times a day on the most optimal time to feed the fish. So far, it is being used by 347 farmers. Now, rivals no more. Libya's UN-backed Government of National Accord and the self-styled Libyan National Army signed a permanent ceasefire agreement. The two parties agreed to leave the front line and all foreign fighters to leave Libya within 3 months. Now, in Ethiopia, the Ministry of Women, Children and Youth implemented a mentorship program for adolescent girls. The program, called Empowering Girls for a Brighter Tomorrow, will help girls acquire knowledge from the experience of Ethiopia's women leaders. It involves daily routine activities to inspire girls to lead. Now, Tanzania launched a $59 million leather factory in the Kilimanjaro region. President Magufuli stated that the facility aims to end importation of leather goods and cultivate the habit of buying locally made goods. The facility will also help expand the market for hides and skins in East Africa. Now, a win for bilateral trade. Rwanda and Angola signed an agreement to grow and promote business investments between the two countries. The opportunities are in the field of manufacturing, transport, mining and tourism, among others. That's all for now. Visit our social media pages to interact with us. Do stay tuned for more.
Homegrown African innovations tackling COVID-19.
Every cloud has a silver lining. This proverbial phrase has clearly manifested itself during the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa. Before this pandemic, Africa was rarely in the news for inventions in drones, robots, contact tracing apps, non-invasive testing kits, oxygen-making machines, and other high-tech products. And yet here we are, witnessing an incredible display of possibility. Africa is managing the complexity of the world's most daunting pandemic and looking within for solutions against it. South Africa is one of the countries which launched several innovative products to combat COVID-19. Early September, the country's health minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, announced the launch of a phone app to combat COVID-19.
Today we are launching a powerful new tool that will help us to contain the coronavirus and prevent a second wave of infections. The Department of Health has developed a mobile app called COVID Alert SA, which uses advanced Bluetooth technology developed by Apple and Google to notify you if you have been exposed to the coronavirus.
For an incisive analysis on this subject, we are joined by Dr. Modrek Chibi, World Health Organization Advisor for Innovation in Africa. Now, we have seen a lot of new innovations in Africa by Africans during the past few months during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you tell us more about this?
Thank you very much for having me on this show. As the old adage goes, necessity is the mother of invention. Indeed, we have seen emergence of new innovative ways of dealing with the pandemic. And this was necessitated by, I could say, the panic that this pandemic, we are going to address it in the face of weak health systems. So governments didn't have an option other than to come with innovative ways of mitigating the risk of this deadly disease.
Dr. Modrek Chibi, World Health Organization Advisor for Innovation in Africa.
Pre-COVID, Africa imported most of its medication and medical equipment. If recent developments are anything to go by, then great changes are coming across Africa. For instance, in Rwanda, the country's biomedical engineers developed a ventilator following the COVID-19 outbreak, which is the first locally made ventilator in the Central African country. Let's take a listen.
This ventilator is programmed in such a way that it uses natural oxygen to support patients with severe respiratory conditions. That enables the user to adjust the rate of oxygen pushed in the lungs of the patient and adjust the oxygen mix. We have some of the material to develop the ventilators, but the difficult part was to come up with the idea. Coronavirus outbreak sparked the idea. We applied the same machines we used to train our students to come up with this ventilator.
What are some of the outstanding examples of innovation by African countries during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Where we saw drone technology, which was deployed in Rwanda and Ghana. And the drones were deployed for delivering key messages or key vital packages to remote clinics in Rwanda. And in Ghana, we saw that they used drone for pooling of testing to mitigate against shortage of test kits. And the other thing that we also realized is a redeployment of some of the technologies that were deployed for other outbreaks that we have had. For instance, Ebola. We realized that in Liberia, they redeployed their application called mHero, which is a telemedicine tool that they used to train or even to provide information to healthcare workers.
What if we build something that can help people to register themselves and keep track of them, so that shall there be a case of one person turns reactive or confirmed to be having corona, then the group of people he has ever met throughout can be traced as quickly as possible.
Last May, the World Health Organization in the African region hosted the first meeting in a series of virtual sessions for innovators across the region to showcase homegrown creative solutions.
Now, during this session, COVID-19 innovators from Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, Guinea and Kenya presented their pioneering solutions.
This Kenyan student here explains about how he developed a swab, which is a brush-like device used to collect the patient's specimen.
The innovative part of this swab is very flexible, as you can see. So it has been engineered to be flexible, meaning that once it gets to your nasopharyngeal path, it's not going to cause you pain, as it will move well to the place where it's supposed to get the swab.
Now, Dr. Chibi, what needs to be done to continue supporting innovators and maintain the current momentum of homegrown solutions for medical needs in Africa?
As you know, innovation is the ultimate game changer. We are advocating for countries to invest in new infrastructure. And for innovation to flourish, some underlying technological platform needs to be in place. Things like internet, robotics. We have realized that if there is lack of underlying technological platform, even if our homegrown innovators have got brilliant minds, sometimes they are incapacitated simply because of lack of underlying technological platform that necessitate their innovation development process. We are also advocating for governments to come up with incentive framework or even policy framework that makes it easier or facilitate development, scaling, and monitoring impact of those innovations.
Many African leaders are chairing national COVID-19 task forces of public health to guide the pandemic response. This has created an opportunity for innovations to be recognized publicly and thus boost the morale of innovators.
We are grateful that we have seen innovation out of this crisis. For example, students at Kenyatta University need to be applauded for developing a prototype of an inexpensive ventilator for use in our local hospitals. Not to be left behind, other universities and technical institutions are also making remarkable progress.
Dr. Chibi, You talked about mainstreaming innovations. Do you think African governments have given science the seriousness it deserves, especially in terms of budgetary allocations?
When we are talking of budget allocation in countries, yes, it's important. But when you provide the space for innovation to flourish, you may not necessarily need to provide hard cash on it. Provide incentive mechanism, provide that policy framework, come up with some de-risking mechanism, to support scaling, and all these elements that comprises what we call innovation ecosystem. When they are in place, I tell you, government may not necessarily need to put their cash on the table so that they can facilitate development of innovation. Because I've interacted with key stakeholders, innovators, innovation funders, private sector. The bottleneck has always been the government support.
Dr. Chibi, you mentioned there about your interaction with the private sector. Now, in your opinion, what is the role of the private sector in Africa in boosting innovation?
Private sector has such a tremendous and important role to play in the innovation ecosystem. Just looking at it from a value chain perspective, if the private sector can support innovation efforts on the continent by leveraging their expertise, their capabilities, you realize that there will be of value add to the innovation efforts on the continent. What am I trying to say? We know that private sector have established functional manufacturing platform. They have got such a network, distribution network, or value chain networks. They are good at communication. They are good at marketing. And they can also provide support on business development to our innovators.
Now, from our discussion with Dr. Chibi today, it's quite obvious that a lot more can come out of Africa in terms of innovative technologies and solutions.
What African innovators need is support from their governments and the private sector.
Now it is time for us to hear what you, our viewers, had for us this week. In recent weeks, the state in Nigeria has been sensitive, of course owing to police brutality that has affected more so the youth. Now these are what our viewers shared with us this week. Omar Ababusman shared 2 images and stated, if you think this man looted the warehouse because he was a hoodlum or because he takes pleasure in violence, something is wrong with your head. Perhaps he has not come in contact with a bag of rice for years. His life might have been just hand to mouth. Nigeria. We also had PACA shared an image titled Pan-African Activists Condemn U.S. Training of Nigerian Police. We also had Amatone stating, make a report about EndSARS Now protests in Nigeria. Let our voices be heard. And that we will do. Surely next week we have a whole episode program on Nigeria. Don't miss it.
Well, on that positive note, we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Today, which focused on a fragile peace deal between the Sudanese government and some of the country's rebel groups.
We also highlighted on encouraging technological innovations in Africa amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
So drop us a line and let us know your views on what you have seen in today's show.
On behalf of the entire Africa Today team, I would like to thank you all for watching. Stay safe and goodbye for now.